Hey guys, Darren Kelly, Coach of Blind Pods, and welcome back to another episode of the Club Preview Series. On today's episode, it's a very important episode. We're talking about North Melbourne. If you haven't been around before, North Melbourne have been one of the more fantasy relevant sides for us in recent years. They've provided some really high level premiums for us in different lines, but they've also provided those really cheap rookies options in the last couple of years that have just absolutely killed it and provided so much cash generation for us. And I think this year is no different. We've got a lot of different options to look at, whether you're looking at the top premiums, you've also got to look at the mid prices that we'll get into, and then you've got a couple of rookies we'll get into as well. So let's get into it.
All the pain.
So let's get into North Melbourne. North Melbourne have been struggling for the last probably 5 or so years. They've really hit the draft and really trying to just generate that youth and talent through the draft period rather than top up their list, really going back to the draft in that way. So that's provided a lot of different options for us in fantasy over the years, and I think this year is going to be no different. But what are we expecting from them in 2025? I do expect them to probably improve a little bit this year. They've made some important inclusions, which we can get straight into. Caleb Daniels probably the one off the rip straight away. He slots into a nice defender role, which they've probably been trying to fill for a little while, with Harry Sheeslin moving forward and McKercher being a predominant midfielder when he was drafted. So that fills a hole for them after losing, Hall and Zeeble the year prior. You've got Jack Darling, who comes over from West Coast. I think he provides a predominant role for North Melbourne here because they've really been crying out for that second key tool alongside Nick Larkey, who has been struggling trying to manage the load. They really don't have that second guy, so I think he easily slots into their best 22, which you can see on the screen. If not, he takes the first tool. It will be interesting to see how that sort of dynamic works. He's sort of got the body to really take that first defender. It's just whether the opposition chooses to go on Larky or goes on Darling. Darling's traditionally been that second key forward behind Josh Kennedy, that West Coast. So that will be interesting to see, but not fantasy relevant. I think it's just going to be an important thing for them, and I think they'll improve. They also picked up the likes of Luke Parker, so a lot of experience there coming from Sydney. I think he's going to be one that just provides that mental capacity that, when they are getting smashed or they are just losing their way a little bit, he'll be able to stabilise them. Whether he gets thrown into the middle or not, we'll discuss a little bit more when we get to him. Besides that, they really picked up Jacob Constancy, if that's how you say it, from Sydney as well. He's sort of an untried player. He hasn't really played too many games and is a key forward. So I think he's going to be a bit more depth. I'm not sure if he's going to get a game instantly, but we'll wait and see on that one. For their outs, they had a few retirees and Liam Shields, Hugh Wood and Jaden Stevenson. So probably not huge names when it comes to North Melbourne for the last couple of years. Liam Shields probably the main one. He played majority of games last season, but he was playing out on the wing, so that opens up a wing spot for potentially a player that we'll get into soon. Hugh Greenwood only played 3 games last year, so he wasn't really a non-factor realistically. Just been battling injuries and probably out of flavour. Jaden Stevenson's probably a bit in the middle of the pack. He played a dozen games in 2024 across different roles. He played up forward majority of the season, but also got flung back as a bit of a last-ditch effort to play that defender role, which we know does score really well. In terms of the draft, they headed to the draft of pick 2 and pick 27 in the first round, and they picked up Finn O'Sullivan and Matt Whitlock, so we'll get into them a little bit later. I think we're not probably going to look at Matt Whitlock too much because he is a forward, more of a key forward, bit taller. They tend to take a little bit longer in terms of the development, so I don't see him playing too many games this year, especially with their now quite deep forward line with those key tools. As I discussed, Darling comes in. They've already got Zohar, you got Larky there, and they brought in Constantine as well, and plus a couple others that we already had on the list. So not sure how much game time he'll get unless he can really be a standout for them. So probably won't talk about him too much, but Finn definitely we'll talk about. Now let's get into the players individually, and we got to start at the top as I do, and you got to start with the man Tristan Cherry. He went absolutely ballistic for us last year. Well, not for me. I unfortunately did not start him last year, but he increased his average from 66 to 114, so nearly a 50-point increase last year, which is absolutely ridiculous, and was a star player. And if not to jump the gun here, but he could be a fantasy pick for us very, very quickly this season if all things go his way. So he's priced at 114.5, so he's got to cost you $1.175 million. So he is the second highest rated fantasy player for us, and the same thing with this is a second ruck on the list as well, just behind Rowan Marshall. Like I said, he had a major breakout season last year. Just really took the reins from Goldstein only last year, if not 2 years ago now, where we saw a little bit of him in 2023, where he came out in round one. He got injured within the first, I think it was the first quarter, and he was absolutely killing it. He's always shown this sort of capacity to be able to score really quickly with just his ferocity with the tackle. So I think it was no surprise that he was going to go big. It was just whether his body was going to sustain that, and he proved that last year. Played 23 games, so played them all, and absolutely just killed it. So he is one that we're going to look into this year. Whether you can start him, there's two sides of the coin. You could say that there's no surprise that he is value, to say the least, that he killed it in the second half of the season particularly. I'll show you his scores here. First half of the year, he did pretty good, but you can't say that he did badly. But the second year was where he really, second half was where he really kicked it up in the second year. Only had 2 scores in the 90. Everything else was above and beyond 100. Even had a couple or 3 scores, particularly over 150. So he's got that ceiling, he's got that consistency, and he's got that ferocity. So what are the reasons why we should pick him for 2025? And the fact is that he went at 125 average in the second half of the season. Now, I will say that did come with a lot of easier matchups. You know, you got your Richmond, your Geelong, your what's it called? Eagles. Didn't really have too many hard ones. He did have a 118 against the likes of Wits, who is typically a harder matchup, but he had 2 nice ones against Tim English as well, with both 120. So typically when he had a nice matchup, he absolutely killed it. But when he had just a regular hard matchup, you know, Maxi Gawn, a 99, and a Brody Grundy 94, that's probably what you'd expect against a proper ruckman on the other opposition. So he did have a quite easier run. So I'm not expecting him to average 125 for all year next year, but I think there's definitely going to be patches where he does average that quite easily if the fixture suits. And that's probably where I should jump into his fixture this year. It's not looking quite as nice as I'd wish it was. If I just jump into the rolling or the scale of hardness. So here goes Tim English, Max Gawn, O'Brien, Brody Grundy, and then Wits for his first 5 games. So only one of those is actually a good matchup for him, and that is Tim English in round 1. Just to really reference it back to what he scored last year. So he scored a 129 against Tim English last year, also a 122 later on in the year. But he scored a 99 against Max Gawn, an 83 against the likes of, who was that? O'Brien, a 94 against the Wits. No, a 94 against Grundy, and a 75 against the likes of Wits. So that, to me, is a hard run, and obviously showing that the scores that he reflected last year, yes, came from both the first half and the second half. Shows you enough that he probably is going to average a lot closer to 100, if not even below 100 for the first month of footy, if not a little bit longer. So that's probably a justification to say that maybe you don't want to pick him because you expect him to jump down in price. And that's got me considering him, not pricing him, even though he is so highly owned at the moment. He is 56% owned, which is, I think, justified. You know, how good he was last year. I think a lot of us just thought he'd take it to a new level and he could just continue on and be this fantasy pig and even push 120s this year. So I'm not surprised that he's that highly owned, but I guess when you you consider it in terms of a strategy point of view. You're always looking for the value, and what the thing I'm looking at is with those prices and then with that hard run to start the season, is there a possibility that we can pick him up later on in the season at a cheaper price? And I think that's possible. We've always known that these guys priced at the top end do have these lulls every so often, and if you time it right, you can pick them up. It's just tricky when you're talking about the ruck line because it can hurt you quite quickly. I remember last year I started with Grundy and Gorn, and my plan was to start the year with Grundy and then flick him on, when he sort of maxed out in his price, because I didn't expect him to be this top performer and be this rock pig that we saw in the past. So I always had that plan to move him on, but that trade sort of cost me a little bit because it made me feel like I was behind because I wasn't getting that upgrade on field as such. It was sort of a very minimal upgrade, and obviously I did trade him to Royal Marshall, and unfortunately Royal Marshall did have an injury concern pretty quickly after that. But nevertheless, it can be a bit of a tricky one when you're playing around with the rucks because it is such a vital role. You've only got 2 spots to play with, so you got to weigh up whether it's worth just setting and forgetting, and you don't have to worry about what his price is doing. You got to look at the other side of the coin as well, though. Who are you picking? You've got your Tom De Konings, who potentially is an option. Sean Darcy's probably the only other major factor there. 200-300k more cheaper than what an X-Area is, so you could potentially make some coin before that. It's just really timing that position where you can flick them on and get them to the top guys. But like I said, you got to look at both sides of the coin. Can you just start with him and just don't worry about it? Absolutely. I think with the way that our teams are structured up at the moment, with we're having such a cheap forward line and there's a lot of value in the midfield, we're really looking to pay up in the ruck line and the defensive line with some primos in there. So I think there's definitely a way that you can structure your team and have both primo rucks, whether that's a Marshall and an X-Area or an X-Area and a Gorn, or even someone in that price range as well. I definitely think that's a possibility. So he's definitely one that you want to keep an eye on. There's a lot to go under the bridge for him. Fingers crossed he can put a full preseason together and come with a clean health and smash this season as well, because I want to see him become a fantasy pig for us. The next one we want to talk about is, no surprise, this man has been a fantasy superstar since he started his career, if you're not from birth. That is Harry Sheezel, absolutely smashing it. Came out in his rookie career and started with an average of 97.3. He backed that up last year and improved it from to a 112.1. It is now priced at $1.15 million, and he's the 3rd highest fantasy player in the league. So you've got number 2 and 3 for North Melbourne in the same team. No coincidence there. He is the number 1 rated defender as well. Luckily to hold on defense status there. Like I said, he's a fantasy gun. He just knows how to rack it up no matter where he is. Particularly what I'm looking at with Sheezel, with the way that his year developed, was that in the first 7 rounds, he was this halfbacker, which we saw last year. He just absolutely racked up everything, took a lot of kick-ins, took a lot of +6s, but then we saw him sort of shuffle into this mid-forward role where we started to see him get a lot more CBAs and spend a bit more time forward, which is the end goal for North Melbourne, where they want to see him play throughout their career, because he is such a good user of the footy. They want to see him deliver into the forward line and really hit up those forwards. So that's where they want him, and that's where I see him playing a lot more this year. But in terms of what he did, so he averaged 125 in the first part of the year with some massive scores, consistently went over 120 for the first 5 weeks, even hit a ceiling of 159. But once he started to shift forward, it was really a bit of a tale of 2 halves, really. When he was 40% time in the midfield, he averaged 112.6, so a little bit more improvement on what he currently is priced at. But if he was anything less than 40%, then he really struggled and he averaged 88. So that's a huge gap when you're looking at what his potential is for 2025, because you really got to factor in where he's going to play. You're looking at the midfield mix for the likes of North Melbourne. I can show you their CBA mix from last year. So obviously, LDU was the number one main man. He's been there for multiple years now. Wardlaw is clearly second for them, and I think that's going to continue. It's really that third option that really struggled. You know, they tried Will Phillips through there. They had Jai Simpkin comes, particularly in the second half of the season. He was majority in there, probably 60%. Tom Powell was here and there throughout the season. I think he's probably going to play a little bit more half back this year. Then you really got Sheasel that came through the wings and was 50% here and there. You know, he averaged about 30%, but when he went into the midfield, it was probably closer to 50%, where he was, even when he was starting outside the CVAs, he was starting on the half forward flank and really pushing into the stoppages anyway. So I don't think it's a major concern for him in terms of what he's going to do, but I do predict that he's going to drop in average quite significantly. I don't think he's going to be able to maintain this 112. I do think he's going to average a lot closer to probably 100. So I reckon he's going to be about 100 to 103 sort of range. Just, you know, with the people that they've included, you know, the likes of Luke Parker, how many CBAs does he take up? Do they continue with Jai Simpkin in there? Obviously, I spoke about Tom Powell and Will Phillips. And they've also got the new kids in Finn O'Sullivan to come into the side as well. Does he get some CPAs straight off the bat, or do they treat him like the rookies that they've done in the previous with the Sheasel and the McKercher and put him in the back line to really filter them into the AFL system and get them comfortable? So Sheasel's one that I'm definitely considering, but probably more on the back end of the list just because I think it is quite a high price to pay, and I do see him going backwards. However, I do still see him being a top 6 defender, especially in the top range of that. So big one to watch for me. Next one is, no surprise, is the rookie coming off the first year, and that is Kobe McKercher, sorry. First year in the system, he averaged 82.3, so a really good year by him in what was a very up and down season. Looking at his scores, you could easily say he's a bit of value considering there is a low 50 and a 2 in there. That 2 was particularly an injured score where I think he just got injured in the first half and just subbed off quite quickly. So that quickly lowers his average quite easily. So you could say that he's priced unders. You can even see just his adjusted source score is nearly 5 points of value instantly. What I was going to say, he particularly went to a new level when Sheasel moved forward. So in round 7 was when Sheasel moved forward. He instantly took the reins and he went to a new level. So you can see scores up here. And when he took that main distributor role, he averaged 94.5. So that's 12 points of value, and that was across 10 games. So it was a good game, a good amount of source that you could say that you're confident with him that he's going to average this. The only problem with me when I'm looking at a McKercher is what his role is going to be in this new year. Is he going to play backman? Because the whispers are that he's going to play more of that wing role where we saw Liam Shields there last year. Someone's going to fill that role, and they're talking that McKercher is going to push up the ground a little bit more. Now, I still think McKercher could go very well in this role, but it's not the role that we really want him in because that halfback role is such a fantasy blessing for us, and we've seen so many players go so well in it that's the role I want to be him, the role I want him to be in. And just paying up for an 83 points, so 850k approximately for a winger, just doesn't sit too well for me, unfortunately, and I see a very limited upside in that role. So it's probably on the back burner for me. I was really keen on him in the preseason, but just hearing that a little bit scared me off. It's a big watch in the preseason, but even if he does continue the wing role, I think he can average 90. If he was in the back line, I think it could be a lot closer to that 95 to 100, but we'll have to wait and see. I just want to quickly touch on Luke Parker as well. Probably not too much of fantasy relevance because he is a lot more expensive than what I thought he would have after what was a pretty horrible year for him with a bit of injuries. He only averaged 63 approximately, but he's priced at 92, so 840k approximately. Why he's on my watch list is because if he can get back to being his regular 95, which we've seen over his career quite easily. He would be in the top 6 considerations for us in terms of a forward option because he does have forward status. So he's one that I want to keep an eye on. Maybe they throw him the keys in the midfield just to be like, let's get these kids competitive. Let's see what the kids can do, and let's throw in the old head to see what where he can lead this club in his final years of his career. So just one I want to keep an eye on. However, I do expect them to play a quite heavy forward midfield option. So probably 50-50%, if not, probably closer to a 40-60 split where he's only 40% in the midfield, just with, the likes of LDU, Wardlaw, and then Sheasel probably ahead of him. Then he's probably switching with the likes of Jai Simpkin as a rest forward as such. So I'd probably not see too much upside, especially at his 82 price. If he was at his 63 option, then he'd be much more tasty, but probably not one I'm super likely to look at. So just want to keep an eye on, particularly because he's moved from clubs. The next one as well is Jai Simpkin. Now, I had Jai Simpkin a little bit in the back end of last season as he sort of picked up and sort of stabilized his role. He is priced down at 76. So roughly below 800k, so it's a decent range, especially for a forward option for us. He could potentially be your F1 if you're keen on him, but I'm very unlikely to pick him considering the inclusions. Your Luke Parker's, Harry Sheasel becoming more inclusive in that forward line, the likely of Finn taking some of the CBAs as well. I just don't know. I think that his CBA numbers, particularly in that back half, are going to drop. So I think that only means that he's going to score less. We saw that in the first half of the season when he did have minimal CBAs. You're talking your 30%, and he wasn't scoring particularly well. I can show you his scores here. There's a lot of 50s, or there's a couple of 40s in there as well. So I'd say he probably averaged about that 55 in that role. So not particularly well when he's away from the CBA. So very bottom of the list, but just one I want to keep an eye on. Again, he is the captain of the club, so he could be throwing the keys if things go a bit pear-shaped. And he also scored 88.6 in the back half of the season. So definitely could be one that could improve if he's given the right role. So keep an eye on, but very unlikely as well. The next one, probably the one you've all been waiting for, is Caleb Daniel. He is by far the easiest selection for me, especially out of the ex-Dogs, I think. He's going to the most cushiest role. He is the cheapest by far, at price down at 50. Can you believe that? 50. So 514k as a forward option for us. So I think he's just the easiest option. When we're talking about the halfbacker for North Melbourne, you list off a bunch of names like a Zeeble, a Hall, Sheila gone back through there last couple of years. Then you only got to look at last year where you got Kobe, Fisher, Powell, and even the likes of Stevenson went through there for a couple of games, and they all averaged 80 in that role quite comfortably. So I think Caleb is a minimum of 30 points undervalued at this current point. And I think he's a much more fantasy player than the likes of some of those names. So I think he can easily push 90s, if not hit that triple figures and even push above and beyond that, depending on how competitive North Melbourne are going to be this year. I probably don't need to sell him too much. I think he's well and truly in most people's teams. If I look at his ownership percentage, he's at 61, nearly 62%. So don't really need to talk to you into it too much. He's just an easy lock for us, and I think he's going to push closer to be F1 than what a lot of people think. So lock him in your sides and don't even consider him again unless something comes out in the preseason that he's not playing the role that we expect. And now to finish it up, I wanted to just talk about the rookie in Finn O'Sullivan. I think he's probably the only one that we're really looking at in terms of their rookie lists. He was their pick number 2, and they have shown to give a lot of time for these rookies. So what did he average in the VFL and such? So he averaged 42 in the under 18, so not a super big sample size. It was only across 2 games, and 42 isn't the greatest. I'm not particularly 100% sure what happened in those games, but yeah, not the greatest source of scoring. But he did average a 76 across 4 games in the Talent League. But it was a heavily interrupted season he had a couple of injury issues here and there. So I think he's highly likely to get game time as long as he is fit and healthy. And coming into the preseason, all I've heard is that he's doing quite well. So I think he will be one that we can look to start in round one. And considering the way that North treat their rookies, looking at their Sheasels and their Kobe McKerches, particularly in the last year where they were their first and second round picks or such, they they threw him in the back half just to get them introduced to the system. I think there's a spot there for the likes of Sullivan to really slot in there and just ease himself into the game. So I'm hoping that's the way they go, and I think he's going to be an easy selection if that happens. And I think paying this 337k price tag for him is absolutely an easy option for us if that comes true. Um, but I'm just not 100% sure what's going to be happening there. He seems to be more of an impact player for me. Just considering his scores, he doesn't show that fantasy ceiling like we've seen with a Sheasel and the McKercher. So I'm not expecting those lofty heights where they, a Sheasel will average 97 in his first year in fantasy, and McKercher was 93 and 83. Sorry. I'm expecting he's probably going to be a lot lower and be probably closer to a 60 if he's in that same sort of role. So, not expecting him to be a keeper for the season, but definitely a good cash generation for us. Even in our forward lines, he hopefully picks up defender status quite quickly. To finish us off really quickly, I'll just scan through the best 22 and give you some opinions. I do probably agree with how the halfback lines up. They've got a good stack of key defenders there. Caleb Daniel slotting in the halfback role quite easily. We saw a lot from Jackson Archer to probably take over that position in the back end of last season. He did really well there, so he probably jumps up a few ahead of some of the other guys that I probably had my eye on that I was keen on, but probably he has gone past him. Not really looking at Bailey Scott. He's priced fairly high, I think closer to the 80 mark. He's been a fantasy scorer for a little while. Harry Sheasel smack bang in the middle. Probably not going to see that much CBA usage. I don't expect him to be a full-time mid, but I expect him to probably get a little bit more than what he saw last year, where he was probably averaging around that 50%. I probably hopefully jumps up to probably closer to 60. So we'll see how that sort of affects his average. Jai Simpkin and Luke Parker on the half-forward flanks. Then you've got the tall forwards and, Jack Darling, Larky, Zerha's at third tall. Cherry, Wardlaw, and Luke Davies-Uniacke is perfect, I think. And then you got O'Sullivan, Fisher, Dersma, and Tom Powell on the bench. Probably is pretty damn accurate for me. So that's probably about it for today, guys. Before I leave you guys, just if you wanted to ask me any personal questions, I have set up a QU page now. So go check out that and go drop me any questions that you have. It is free at this point in time, so drop any questions that you may want to keep away from your friends, or maybe there's someone that you've considered and that you don't want too many other people to know about, or no one's spoken about them. So drop them in the comment section below, or go see qu.com.au. Besides that, please subscribe, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Bye.